you have stumbled onto the inaugural, the antecedent, the primal genial, the premiere, the first episode of the StryCast. Okay, so the reason we're doing this is because we wanted to give you, fans of Strymon, a chance to see behind the curtain and learn more about the people that make your favorite Strymon products. And also, we wanted to give you a chance to be able to ask us questions and leave us comments. So in order to do that, we've actually come up with 2 different ways to do that. So we have an email address you can send comments and questions to. That's StryCast@strymon.net. And we also have a call-in number. It's area code 310-817-0404. And if you are international, remember to put a +1 in front of that number. But I should also say that operators are not standing by. Just give us your comments, give us your questions, and we will try to answer those on subsequent podcasts. But today, I am extremely excited to announce our very first guest for the first podcast is none other than Pete Celi, our DSP genius co-founder, the guy who is absolutely responsible for the way that our gear sounds. So I want to bring him on. Everybody say hello, Uncle Pete. And there we go. Wait, there we go. There's Pete. There he is. Hello, Pete.
Hey, Sean. How you doing?
It's too early to tell. It's too early to tell. You look fantastic. You look like you're in a beach house on the edge of Spain.
Oh, nice.
Yeah.
I guess it's cold at the beach because I'm wearing a hat.
Yeah, I'm wearing a hat. I'm wearing my baked potato T-shirt only because I got to figure that I got to represent. But I'm freezing. It's 25 here today. So
cool.
Anyway, so thank you for coming here and thank you for doing this. I think this is going to be a fun thing that fans of Strymon will sort of get a kick out of, and we're going to talk about guitars and music and technology and probably baseball, knowing you guys. And I think it'll be something that people will get something out of. So, cool. When you think about your role at Strymon, in a short little bit, how would you describe what it is that you do before we dig into how you got there?
I'd say I am the sound designer, and up until the last few years, I was the sound algorithm, the only sound algorithm developer. So I would write the code and then do the kind of critical sound design to craft the sounds of Strymon. So the last 2 or 3 years, we've had a couple of other people get involved with that in some of our products. But
yeah, and I want to talk about that in a minute because I think that is probably something that required some adjustment. Once if you're the only person whose fingers are in the code and only person that decides how things sound, it's probably got to be tricky and a little bit of an adjustment to let some of that control go. Was that difficult?
No, the way it came about, actually, Greg, who will probably be a guest on one of these subsequent podcasts, I would imagine. Greg Stock, one of the co-founders, was interested in exploring the DSP capabilities for doing distortion in amp sounds. So he kind of took that on as a project that he did, I guess, kind of a little bit on the side at first until he. Did
he not tell you he was doing it at first? Did he sort of like, hey, I'm going to work on this stuff, not tell Pete?
Honestly, I think he was kind of dropping hints that I should probably start looking at things like that. And I didn't take the hint. So he decided, well, he'll do it himself. So it worked out well because also, he is, a guru of all things analog as well. So he had a lot to draw from his analog experience of, circuit design and amplifiers and things. So, and he's a quick study, so he, quickly. I mean, it was impressive, and so he got up and running, and then became really an expert in the Shark DSP programming, and then coding in general, so that he wasn't stepping on my toes. In fact, he actually approaches coding from an actual point of view of someone who writes code and has some amount of pride in the code in the sense of how it's presented in format and how it would look, whereas I kind of I really just write equations. I write math equations
Right.
to hopefully make them and adjust them until they sound good. But I the finer points of actually writing code, like that's not my strong point. I get presented with a do code here. That's what we call it, where the system's all set up, and it's like, the background and the firmware and everything's in place, and I just say, okay, the input samples come in here, and I can do whatever I want, and I send them out here. So everything from that point is a complete mess, but it, my my fallback has always been, um, we make products that produce sound. We don't, we aren't selling, the actual code itself, or so it's something that it's like having a room that looks neat, but you open the closets and then the bowling ball is going to fall on your head or
Oh,
something.
it's just like this room. Yeah, exactly. If you were to move the camera a millimeter either way, it would be like, oh my God, is that underwear? Yeah. I mean, it's just, you don't want to see that stuff. So did that help? Like, did him sort of working on stuff that was a bit in your sandbox at first, did that, obviously it freed you up to do other stuff, I'm sure, but that was probably kind of a fun collaboration. In some ways, the way I think about what you do is a similar thing to me thinking about music production or thinking about working on records or whatever. For the longest time, you were like the artist and the recording engineer and the mix engineer and the mastering engineer. And that's a lot of jobs to have for one person. But at the same time, it means that there's all sorts of benefits from it, I'm sure. You don't have to tell the guy who's coding what it's supposed to sound like, because
Right. And that was the adjustment. Once Greg got the systems in place, and this was, it started with the Sunset and Riverside, and then onto Iridium. But for those projects, we had a little more of a kind of a divided approach, where in essence he was kind of the engineer, the DSP engineer, and I was the sound designer, because the code he wrote was so kind of like, presented in a way that is really efficient, but a way that was foreign to me. I couldn't go in and kind of like mess with his code. Plus, he probably wouldn't want me to, because he'd be like, "No, don't do that." But so we had a collaboration where he actually designed some kind of sound design tools for me, where there would be in another interface, or calling some other math programs, I could make changes in it, and then it would get compiled, and those variables and parameters would then get dumped into the code. So especially in Iridium, that was how that system worked. And like the room knob on Iridium, which is a really powerful part of the Iridium experience. There was just basically it was a MATLAB, or actually Octave, which is the open source version of MATLAB.
Right.
He wrote a script where I could go in and I could take, so that those reverbs are a combination of room impulse responses and some algorithmic.
Right.
Yeah. And so basically I could call in the impulse responses I want. I could modify those impulse responses in various ways. And then there was a very powerful algorithmic reverb that I could, and this was basically all in a kind of a control set that Greg provided for me in this program. But so I used that to kind of craft the three different, room sizes by, just kind of trying those parameters, and then, sending it over to Iridium, and then like listening and going, okay, I think we need to, bring this tail in a little bit earlier. So, so from that standpoint, really, Greg was like the electrical engineer, the coder, the programmer, and really I was just kind of like the sound guy, to like, okay, let's kind of doctor this up and make it, the way, the way we want it to be for a final product.
I'll get back to this in a second, because I think that part of what you're a very rare human being in that you are highly technical, but also a very creative spirit and a creative soul, and think about things in that way, much like we're talking about beautiful code versus ugly code. It's like there's a very different sort of a mindset between the two things. But I want to go all the way back for a minute and just start, because all this stuff in your career, my career, whatever, just happened because we played guitar. And so how did the guitar thing start for you? Like some people, they have like an older brother or an uncle or a cousin or something that introduces them some, did you have, when you started out playing guitar, I think about, I watch you play in these videos and I see, R&B things, I see rock things, I see you play blues things, I see you play Travis picking all, things sometimes, so it's obvious that you listen to a bunch of music. Were you a listener first? Were you a guitar player first? How did that stuff happen?
I'd say I was, I was a clarinet player first. Is actually where
no chicks, right? No chicks, zero chicks.
Yeah. So that that was, I was in the the high school band and the middle, I started playing clarinet when I was in fourth grade or whatever. When they say, hey, okay, you're old enough, kids now can play an instrument. They probably won't,
You're old enough to get ostracized. Yeah, you're old enough to be ostracized for the instrument you play.
So I started doing that, and that's I learned how to read music and learned about music, and I was interested in playing and learning how to play piano, like when I was like 14 or so, but we didn't have a piano in the house, and we weren't going to get a piano in the house, and I had a neighbor down the street who he was the dad of another person in the band, and he had an old acoustic guitar, and he said, hey, if you want to learn how to play, I'll show you some stuff, and you can use this guitar. And
well, that's cool.
So so I started that's how I started this guitar. I remember, I'm sure it's a combination of the first time I played a guitar, and it was also an acoustic guitar that wasn't particularly good. So I mean, I remember just trying to play an first fret F, on the low E string.
Painful as heck.
Yeah. So, but that's where guitar started for me, and I started. So it was I guess it was 14 maybe, and then I guess I was listening to Chicago in that time, because the combination of Chicago was awesome, but also the horn section. So they had the awesome horn arrangements. The Terry Kath playing guitar. So it really appealed to me. And then I think when I was in ninth grade, my oldest brother got me Jeff Beck Wired for Christmas, and so I kind of I was quickly down the path of guitar hero-ish kind of music, and so I was listening to Steve Morris and the Dixie Dregs and Al Di Meola, and I got into Alan Holdsworth and all those guys. Just it was just amazing to me to listen to people at that level, do what they can do with the instrument. So that's kind of where I went. I remember when Van Halen's first album came out, my brother got it on vinyl, and so we listened. First time I'd heard it, and I hear Eruption,
right?
And my brother says, "How does he play that fast?" And I said, "No one can play that fast." I said, "It's all studio tricks." I said, "Whatever." He said, "It's not." I said, "No one can actually. He can't actually play that." And then, didn't take too long before I figured out somehow that, oh, holy cow, he's actually playing that.
Yeah. There's a great Al Stewart, Year of the Cat. Al Stewart, Year of the Cat.
Yeah. Yep,
he has a great story. Apparently, he grew up with Robert Fripp, in the same village. And Fripp used to come into their local guitar store, and just to like we all did. Everyone hangs out at the guitar store, and Fripp would come in as a young kid and try to play all the Les Paul stuff, but he didn't realize at the time that it was all sped up.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Trying to play all this stuff, and he's like.
But that's probably why he started. That's why he developed Frippatronics, because
exactly. It's like, I can't play that fast. What the heck? But of course, Robert eventually figured that out. But it's just funny how the perception of something on a record, especially, and I think that our generation, pre-internet, didn't have a lot of the sort of stuff that people just absolutely take for granted. Like a new product comes out and you go on YouTube that day and you learn everything about it. And a new record comes out and you find out about a band, and then you can go down a rabbit hole for 3 days researching everything about them and where they're from and who. Yep. And back in those days, like, you had the record cover and you had the liner notes, and that was it. Like, you couldn't call anyone to figure out what village Robert Fripp was from, or what studio Eddie Van Halen recorded that in. So that must have been a really eye opener for you to sort of listen to something like that and just have your mind blown, especially as a former clarinetist. I mean,
yeah. So I figured it out on clarinet.
I was going to actually.
I had a lot better chance of playing it on clarinet at that point than I did on guitar. I still actually can't. Tapping is not. It's never. It's never come into my skill set.
Was there anything that guitar taught you about music that was different than what clarinet did? And the reason I ask is because I started on trumpet.
No, we probably the thing that helped me a little bit, because I mean, with clarinet, since I'd been playing, I don't know, for 4 or 5 years, I guess, before I picked up a guitar, I knew how to read music very well, and I was reasonably. I don't know where I first started learning about music theory, but maybe just from books or something. But I kind of knew about triads and chords and structure like that. So I'd say when I picked up the guitar, that was an advantage I did have, in the sense was like I understood the music. I just or at least to a certain extent.
Sure.
But I didn't have, the facility, the dexterity to actually play the instrument when I picked it up. But I kind of knew, what a scale, how you would play a scale, what the notes were, and
right.
And the guy who was showing me, the guy who lent me the guitar, I don't know if it was a Mel Bay, but we actually started from a guitar book. So I was, and it wasn't tab, it was so I was reading the sheet music on the guitar and stuff. So,
was it like classical stuff at first? Was it like Carcassi etudes and
it was, my dog has fleas or whatever. I mean, it was, they were like, kind of like silly, dumb little songs that, serve the purpose.
C-Spot Run musical. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Right. They just serve the purpose to like get you reading and playing a little bit. So, so that was good. But so my introduction to the guitar was from a kind of a I guess traditional music standpoint, in that sense, scales and sheet music and reading and stuff.
That leads me to believe that you were probably always a fairly technical person in your brain. Were you the kind of person that just took apart stuff, sewing machines and engines and stuff like that?
It was a little more, for me, it was like a little more cerebral. Like, I mean, I was always like a good student and kind of like, gravitated towards, math and science and stuff. But I didn't grow up in an environment where I was like, taking apart machines and rebuilding them. It was more like, I don't know what that's all about. I don't want to touch that. You get a transistor radio and it's like, I don't want to touch that. I might get electrocuted. I don't. So
you never got yelled at from your mother tearing apart her sewing machine. Good for you. That's an experience you missed. Good.
I was doing things. I was more like, solving Rubik's Cube without someone telling me how to do it, kind of thing, as opposed to doing something actually, practical.
When did the signal processing, or when did the love of effects and music technology stuff? I mean, did that start like the first time you heard an effect on a guitar and go, bloody hell, that's amazing?
It was probably I'd been playing this bad acoustic guitar for about a year, and I went over to the neighbor's house, and he had a wasn't a Harmony. What was the Sears guitars? Silvertone. He had a Silvertone guitar and a Silvertone amp, and I'd never played an electric guitar, through an amp. It's just been this crummy acoustic. So he said, "Hey, why don't you play through this, see what you think?" And the amp had a spring reverb, and I picked up the guitar, and I don't know if I strummed a G chord or whatever I did, but I hit it, and as soon as I hit that chord, I was just like, "Whoa, this is completely different than the acoustic, like way cooler." At the time, exactly. I appreciate acoustics too, but I was just like, that was it. I was this. There's some sort of like aha moment that went off in my brain, or like this is somehow really important to me to what just happened, because it was just like just kind of like send a shockwave through me. And that wasn't cool. Because of the bad grounding in the amplifier.
Well, it was a Silvertone amp, so from that.
Probably I'm sure it was a lamp cord. There's a lamp cord, the death cap. Anyway, that's another story. But
the death cap.
So yeah, so from there, then so I not too long after that, I got my own cheap Les Paul copy. And if you remember, like when you bought a bad copy guitar in the 70s, it was a bad guitar. I mean, it was not. Dude. It wasn't like today where you can get a pretty good guitar for $99.
It's true.
Like you could get a really terrible instrument that's really just only barely serviceable to actually play and to try to learn on, because the intonation's probably out by a quarter step in each direction on the different strings.
Easy. Could you sing? Could you talk through the pickups? Were the pickups basically like contact microphones?
Yeah. Microphonics and warped necks and bad tuning pad, all that kind of stuff. But I did. I bought an electric guitar, and I don't know what I got for an amp. It's my first amp.
It wasn't a Gorilla with the tube stack button. Was that after your era?
Yeah, it was. I might have got a. Wasn't my first amp, was it?
Trainer, maybe?
A lab. No, it was a Lab series. It was made by. It was Gibson owned. It was like Norland. Is that who they were?
Yeah, yes, a solid state Lab series thing that a lot of Chicago blues guys actually use those for real.
Is that right? It is. It's got an actual analog compressor on the front end. It's got a compressor, two knob compressor on the front. So yeah, my cheap Les Paul copy and my Lab series amp, and then I got a chorus pedal, I think a wah pedal, and Electro-Harmonix big muff.
Dude, you were set.
Was like, I was was making all sorts of noise that no one else in my family wanted to hear, but yeah, I mean, it was kind of like early on. I started getting effects, and it was hearing a delay was like awesome, like, oh my god, it echoes, and
when we talk about because you and I've had conversations about effects and things like that, and it seems like, well, especially at this point, but I don't know at what point it got there, but it feels like you've got a pretty encyclopedic knowledge of kind of a certain era of effects. Like if someone says, what does a small stone or a small clone or whatever sound like? I mean, your brain immediately knows exactly what it does, and probably knows how to recreate it in some ways.
I'm not. In some ways, I think I've got some of that stuff, but I'm really not a historian in that sense where I could, tell you about the different variations, or in 1978 they went to this logo, or they the little registered trademark was down an 1/8 inch or whatever. But I think I do have a kind of a in my head an idea of the the sounds and the character and the personalities of a lot of the kind of, I guess what you'd call classics now.
How is it you went from sort of like being a guitar guy and a clarinet person and definitely a musician, and then going to work for arguably one of the most important sort of chip microprocessor kind of manufacturers on the planet. I mean, how did that progression get you to wanting to work in technology?
Um, it's really like the technology kind of was first in a certain way. Well, so like, you know, guitar music, all that stuff, was, super important to me. But, I was also, as, when I was graduating high school, so I was like, all right, I got to figure out what's the next step. And I really kind of was debating, do I want to apply to Berklee School of Music since I'm from Boston, seems to be, certainly something to consider. And it was like, okay, do I want to do that, or do I want to go um, into engineering? Because that's really kind of, if you're talking about a reliable career, that's where you're kind of going to, have food on the
Eat?
table at least.
Were you going to eat? Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I kind of, I gave it some good thought and decided I should, study engineering and, see what, becomes of music, kind of in a more natural way. So I went to engineering school at the University of Lowell and, graduated my electrical engineering degree. And Analog Devices was, a local company, and back then, and was very. So I got out of college in the, earlier mid '80s, and Analog Devices was, it was like the star player in the area. They
For all the people listening or watching that don't know about them, like, to try to give an idea about their importance, their website is analog.com. Like, that's kind of like having a website like oxygen.com or hydrogen.com. And it's fairly elemental. They're pretty important. So that was a pretty amazing, probably first step to take into your career.
Yeah, it was. It was, and the people there were like, I mean, basically, it was almost like a grad school kind of mentality. Everyone who worked there was really smart, very, sharing knowledge, and Analog Devices actually had their own kind of library of books that people at Analog Devices had written for Analog Devices. So it would be like, Paul Brokaw, the father of the temperature sensing tech. They had people there whose names I had studied in textbooks in college were employed by Analog Devices. So it was really, a pretty incredible kind of environment. But because of that, like it was very serious, and I always there's a certain kind of like pressure. Like, I mean, it was just kind of like kind of seemed it just felt like it wasn't an environment where you kind of kicked back and joked around a lot. It was like, you better, you're serious. No, and the boss is walking by. It's, oh shit, man, I better work on these equations a little better. But it was kind of, I just felt like, I don't know, it's really buttoned down, and really, I kind of just felt like I didn't see myself kind of being, a lot of people there, that was, their careers back in the day, where you stay with a company like that for 30 whatever years and you retire and you've done really, really well for yourself. But I was like, I don't know, I just don't, I don't feel it. I felt like I wanted to kind of explore a little bit more. So after 3 years at Analog Devices, I decided that I was going to come out to California and go to Musicians Institute in Hollywood, which, every month in Guitar Player magazine, you'd see the big, GIT.
It was the place. It was the place to be in those days. I mean, so what year did you get to GIT? Was it
88? So, I worked from Analog Devices 85 through 88, and then in 88 I moved out to California, went to GIT.
Oh, totally. So I'm trying to think. So who was there at the time? So my buddy Scott Henderson was there.
Scott Henderson was like there all the time. Right. Frank Gambale had just left, I think.
Was Joe Diorio still there?
Joe Diorio was there. Howard Roberts was still there.
Dude, man, that's a wonderful time to go to that school. That's amazing.
It was really a great time, and so many great players. I'm drawing a blank on the names. Tommy Tedesco came by and did a 2-hour like I mean, he's basically was a one man tour de force of comedy and music and
He's
gag.
amazing. He's
Yeah.
amazing. I actually got a chance. I got a chance to see him speak for a couple hours at the local music store in Utah where I was a kid.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
And he all the shtick with the banjo. That's how he did
Yeah.
all
Yeah.
the stuff in Shogun. And but
Yeah.
he signed my book, and it's great. I've got a copy of his book. Which, if you guys, any of you people listening, if you ever want to learn, how to read like a super crazy person, buy Tommy's old book if you can find it. But he signed it for me, and it says, "Thanks for the 99 cents, Tommy."
Nice. Yeah. He was something else. So yeah, I
Yeah.
mean, you get guys like that coming by, and yeah, it was just it was a lot of fun, and it's a 12-month program, and it was really kind of like really was like a sabbatical. It was just you know playing guitar, talking guitar, thinking about guitar. Like so, I was 25 when I went out there, I guess,
Mm-hmm.
which was so me and a couple other guys were like the old men of the school because almost everyone else, you know, was just kind of out of high school or you know this was like kind of community college for them or something. But it was a good time. I made some good friends there, and then after the year was out, I was like, okay, so now what am I going to do? Sorry, should I turn off my phone here? It's like making
Just
some.
maybe just turn it on silent. Maybe you don't have to turn it off, but maybe just silent. Now they're very those are extremely aggressive alert sounds, Pete. They're quite sonorous.
Here's my phone, by the way.
Ladies and gentlemen, Pete, Pete still has a flip phone. He does not participate in any modern technology other than the fact that he makes some of the best effect pedals on the planet. It's amazing. It's amazing to me. So you're at GIT though. So you're there and you're hanging out with all these people, and you were one of the oldest students, so you were probably pretty high up in terms of skill level compared to people that got there. What was it about your experience there that made you decide not to do that as a career? What was it there that made you think, I should go do something else?
There are a couple things. So like at GIT they kind of place you in groups based on ability, where it's like if you're traveling around, you have a certain number of kind of core classes in a sense, and so they want people kind of hanging together that are in the same level, so that everyone can get the most out of the learning experience at whatever level. So I was in the top group, but the top guys in the top group, like there were 3 or 4 guys that I looked at in this group that in the group we had maybe like 15 or 20 people in this
Right.
whatever group A we'll call it, or whatever.
Right.
But like the top 4 or 5 guys there were just like so much better than me. It was like, holy crap, these guys are really good. And it's like, and they're going to be really struggling to compete for things, for gigs. And then it's like, my reading or skill, I wasn't like, I was like, I couldn't be a studio musician. I wouldn't be able to kind of promote myself. I'm just like, I think I kind of took an honest stare in the mirror and said, this has been fun, but there's a difference between the guys who can be on call and show up at gigs and get things done, and where I am, which is kind of like, hey, I can appreciate what they're doing and I can see the difference, but I'm also not there. Like, you ever see the Amadeus movie with
Totally.
yeah, and
Totally.
Salieri? He was basically cursed because you could hear the genius of Mozart, but he couldn't do it. So it's like, I'm Salieri. I'm like, I just don't got it, man. So
it's interesting though, because that's there are a lot of people that I'm sure that we both have met over the years that are not that self-aware. I mean, I remember Bill Withers once told me, I hung with him quite a bit when I was younger, and he once told me, I think most people are more comfortable looking out a window than looking in a mirror. And it's it's a pretty serious thing to do for your personality, for your soul, to really look at yourself and be honest about what it is that you want to be able to do, and what you're capable of doing. But I'm wondering as well, was there an element to it where you wanted to protect the fun of guitar? You know, like, and the reason I ask is because, like, Henderson's a buddy of mine. Scott Henderson's good old pal. We were neighbors for 15 years or whatever. And he once made a statement, which I have always thought was interesting, which was, I would rather use my guitar as a paintbrush than as a broom.
Oh, I see. Yeah, yeah.
And what's interesting about that is that, you know, believe me, even guys that are using the guitars like brooms are still kicking it because it's awesome. It's way, you know, it's way better than all sorts of other things you could be doing. However, I understand if you're at a certain point in your life and your career and where you want to take things, if you want to use the guitar only the way you want to use it and protect the fun of it, you know, maybe the idea of doing something else for a living was also better in a way. I don't know if that resonates, but
Yeah, I think what what kind of helped that decision, along to pretty quickly was, since I was in Los Angeles now, and I did have an engineering degree and experience, in engineering. This is where the music companies, are. Some have headquarters here, certainly offices if they're not headquartered in here. So I thought, well, this is an opportunity. Again, before the internet, I, got out a pen and paper and found some addresses and wrote some letters. Dear, sir, to whom may it concern. And I sent out some letters, and one of them was to Elise's, which
nice.
is right there in, it was on off of Jefferson there, kind of Culver City, Los Angeles area, which I was living in Hollywood at the time. So, probably about a 20-minute drive. And it's kind of funny
what products would have been out at that point? I'm trying to think. What was out then? Midi-Verb 2 something?
Midi-Verb 2 was out. Quad-Verb, I think, was just like on the cusp of coming out at that point. Midi-Verb 3, I can't remember if Midi-Verb 3 came out after Quad-Verb. I think it might have, but anyway, it was that time. Like the HR-16 drum machine was out, and the MMT-8. But at that point, ADAT, I don't even know if it had started, like the concept had even been thought of at that point. When I, started at Elise's. But It's kind of funny you think about, like, I wrote a letter to Elise's, and then it's like, I don't know, then you just wait for a call, like maybe like 9 days later, it's like, oh, hey, Elise's, great, you got my letter,
It's like there's people from LinkedIn haven't responded yet. What the heck,
Yeah. So, so I got, interviewed with Elise's, and, started working there. And it was, they had this thing where, like, everyone has to start in the repair department. And then, like, when the next engineering project gets going, it'd be like, hey, let's take someone from repair to, like, bring them into engineering. They were
very like the mail room. So it was like it was kind of like the mail room at Elise's kind of to start. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So I was repairing, quad-verbs and drum machines and MMT8s, and because you do learn, the idea was like, you get to learn about our products and do things, and it's like, you learn, like, which chips go bad, and how to clean the keypads, and there's troubleshooting involved and all that kind of stuff, but you're not really learning too much of the meat and potatoes about, you're not learning anything about why the MMT or the Midi-Verb 2 swell reverb sounds as cool as it does. You just know if the thing's making a bunch of static, the DAC is messed up and you replace it. But anyway, so that was what they did. And it turned out, and it was a lot. I met friends there that I'm still friends with today, and it was a real fun environment. It paid terribly. Like, I took an enormous cut in pay from Analog Devices to do repair at Elise's, but it was fun. Like, we just had a great time. That we were like this crew at work that, we had fun at work. We had fun after work. But then after like a year of doing that, I was like, well, I took a year off to go to GIT, and now I felt like I took another year off kind of in this repair department. But, so like, basically um, I said, I told my manager, whatever, was like, I can't do this anymore. It's like, either I got to like get into real engineering or something, but I can't just keep
Right.
repairing stuff. So he said, well, we're starting this ASIC group, application specific integrated circuit, because Alesis was actually doing their own gate array ASICs. It's called gate array, not Gatorade.
Right.
In
They were doing their own sports drink? Unbelievable.
Yes. Yeah, it was a side project. But so like the signal processing that they did was, aided centrally around this. Basically, it would be this kind of like, blank canvas chip that you could basically set it up to perform the kind of logic functions and operations that you want, and then the fabrication house that makes the chips would then produce those chips for you, and it'd have it would be your custom chip. You buy this chip, and it's
Right.
been programmed to your to your specifications. So they were doing that, but the owner of Alesis, Keith Barr, wanted to actually get into full custom integrated circuits. So they were starting this new kind of venture, which was going to be directly feeding the music products, but making full 15-layer custom integrated circuits. So it's like, well, I have 3 years background in integrated
Analog
circuits.
devices. You're like, yeah.
Analog devices.
I know
So
this.
it's like, so then I started working in the ASIC group at Alesis, which was great because I got to work directly, like shoulder to shoulder with Keith Barr for many years. And
Nice.
he's, I don't use the term genius very much, but I mean, he was a true genius. He was like a ninth grade dropout. He dropped out of school and opened a company making Geiger counters, like when he was 16 years old. So
How random is that? Like what, Geiger counters of all things?
Geiger counters, yeah. He wanted some. He needed vacuum tubes with certain specifications, so he went to some glass blower and some stuff, and ended up like making his own custom vacuum tubes to put in his Geiger counters. But
That's unreal.
Yeah.
Unreal.
So that's the kind of guy Keith was. Like he just would see an opportunity and he would do it. He would just like nothing would stop him, and that's basically how ADAT came to. He saw the vision. There were like so many roadblocks during the development of it. He got a scanning electron microscope so he could like sputter it with gold and look at the actual the magnetic orientations of the tape to find like that level of
it's a helical scan head, right? So it's oh wow.
And that was just I mean, one after another there were just these things that were just like, this is impossible. But he was like kind of single-handedly. I mean, he had help in a sense, but like he's the guy that like if he goes away, this project is never happening. But so
the world will never experience error 7.
yeah, right.
And any of us old ADAT people, I owned 8 at one point, and there were always 4 that worked and 4 that were on a shelf getting repaired. And error 7, I cleaned the. Oh man, that idler wheel. I was a tech.
It was crazy. But the thing is that at the time, even having 4 on hold and 4 was still way cheaper than any other option you could get to record digitally.
Totally, a dash machine was $375,000, like a Sony dash deck at that point. Was
So it was like basically Alesis was doing very well and was well known before ADAT, and then ADAT was just like full rocket ship to the moon kind of thing. I mean, it was crazy.
They were minting money at that point. I mean, how big did that was probably another interesting thing to experience for you, in the sense that, I mean, it must have been quite a small company when you started. I mean, how many people were there when you started?
When I started, it was, I'm trying to think, was it maybe like 40 people, 30 or 40 people maybe?
Oh, and it got to be like 300 or something.
Yeah.
Wow. So that's exponential growth. To see that happen
Oh yeah, yeah,
while you're there. That must have been kind of disconcerting in a way, I guess.
yeah. I mean, it was like, when I started, it was like, hey, we're in this building in this little industrial. It wasn't really an industrial park. It was just kind of, it was a few buildings. Like, hey, we're in this building, and then it was like, oh, we're gonna get that building. And by the time I left Elise's in 2000, it was like, well, actually, because they moved to Santa Monica and we stayed back in Culver City. That was going ahead a little too far. But anyway, in that Culver City thing, we got to building 5. We're all in building 1, and it was like building 1 and on building 3. Yeah, and then it was like, oh, the warehouse is another building, and then we got this. So yeah, there was a lot of expansion, a lot of hiring, and it was still a lot of fun. And I was so in the ADAT, there were a number of different integrated circuits. There was specifically a read amplifier preamp that would read the data off. There was a write amplifier that would energize the coils to write the magnetic data onto the tape. I did both the read and write preamp, but they were designed. Keith kind of like, I was like the guy to implement his vision of what these things would be. Like, we needs to be super fast, so we can only use NMOS. None of that PMOS stuff. You get an extra layer of oxidation to slow down the time constants. But so yeah, Keith, he was leading that kind of charge. But then there were we had our own custom A to D and D to A's in the ADAT too that were we made, and these were like full on semiconductor mask sets. Each chip had, if you do a circuit board, you might have a 4-layer circuit board, so
Right.
hey, you got some ground plane stuff, whatever. Well, these were essentially 15-layer circuit boards because you'd have N layers and P layers and epi pockets and, so forth to make an entire integrated circuit.
Right.
And, we designed our own, the chips had DRAMs and SRAMs, and, that was all part of like, oh, okay, we're going to need a, 10K DRAM for this thing. So let's, you basically, the way you make an 8K DRAM is you make one cell and then replicate it 8,000 times.
Right.
You just have to make sure that they kind of connect the right way but yeah, it was a lot. I learned a lot there, and I learned a lot of signal processing concepts from the A to D and D to A converters and all that kind of stuff. And then, so I around the year 2000, I had been at Elise's for 11 years, and I felt like time for change again. So
I watch you work now, and I see the stuff that you've done at Strymon as a company and stuff, and it's very applied. You're making gear to make a noise that you're looking to make, as opposed to doing a small component of something that someone else is going to. What I mean? It's like, were you disconnected some way from the experience of making the final thing? Is that kind of what?
Absolutely, yeah. And that was part of it, because, I'd be working on, a chip or whatever, and it's like, oh, in 2 years they're going to use this in the was it the QSA? What's the keyboard?
The quadrasynth was the
quadrasynth. Yeah.
Yes, quadrasynth was if I remember correctly, the longest period that I can remember in MI from announcement to ship. I think it took almost 2 years from the time it was announced to the time that it actually sold.
Yeah.
It was unobtainium for a long time. That one.
But things like that. We were working on chips like that for that are you're really kind of in a microcosm of the product. You're really or in the case of converters, just like there's really no connection with a particular product. It's just like these need to be convert analog to digital with a certain set of dynamic range and noise specs and all that kind of stuff. So right. So I did feel like I'm in a music company and this is cool, but I don't feel a connection with the products. So from Elise's, I went to Line 6, and I knew a number of the people at Line 6. In fact, the Line 6 guys had been consultants for Elise's during pretty much the whole duration, I guess, until they actually became Line 6. Before that, they were fast forward designs, and
right. Yeah.
and they were really the real engineering arm of Alesis for the product development. And then during the ADAT, they were very involved too. Just from my recollection, Keith was the guy who was just kind of like pushing it forward, like by sheer will. But the fast forward team, and some internal Alesis guys, of course, too, were, keeping the rest of the project moving forward and, developing. It's a complicated system, of course. But so at Line 6, I was reunited with people I'd known in the past, and it's also some guys I'd worked with at Alesis, Alesis employees that also come over to Line 6. So it was a very familiar environment.
Sure.
And they said, we don't really have something specific in mind, but we've been thinking about this guitar, the idea of making the same principles of our amplifier, applying that to a guitar, so you can have a guitar that can sound like other guitars. Are you interested in taking a look at that? And I said, yeah, sure. And so that was a really a great experience, because I basically had a blank piece of paper in front of me, and it was like, well, see what you can do, see what you can figure out. So I had to kind of figure out what it is I wanted to figure out, and little by little made some progress here and there, and started studying about some stuff about some pickups, and the responses, and strings, and how we're going to use piezo's, and those respond to force and not motion, and that we're going to make the right kind of conversions there. And it was really involved, but it was gratifying, because it was something that really kind of where at Alesis I was generally kind of implementing Keith's vision to more or less his prescribed degree. So it was kind of neat, but it's like, okay. I mean, I also, beyond the product thing, I did feel a little bit like I needed to try to like kind of get out from that protective, like I'm just going to, I'm going to do what Keith tells me to do, because that's what I'm here for. It's like, well, what can I do? So I, working on Variax was rewarding from that standpoint. And then once the product kind of got to past, concept stage, it was like, hey, this can actually be a real product that we can sell. I got involved also in some of the sound design aspects of like, well, how can we, craft these sounds, and what it's capable of doing. And I really felt it was much more satisfying to be working on a product and be closely associated with, the end result. It's a little bit scary, because it can be like, what if they hate it? That kind of stuff.
Like, what if it sucks?
You can't please everybody, but I just found like, okay, I feel much more like I'm closer to where I want to be. So that was good experience. After that, we did the acoustic Variax, which probably has actually more realistically practical application as an instrument than the electric Variax in a sense. And that was another set of discoveries to make, with body resonances, and getting the right kind of equipment to measure it. And I had a pretty cool little system where I could tap the bridge with some sensors on it, and send some information from my spectrum analyzer over to my computer. And then I had written a program that would kind of like dissect the various resonances, and then create a filter bank that's like, that's this thing. And then when you try it and it sounds like it, then you're like, oh, this works. And that's always exciting.
Looking at the way that you can describe a physical object and in a very complex machine in digital language, where do you start, or how do you think about it? I assume it must be different each time, but how do you think about getting down and figuring out what you have to know before you can even start measuring what it is that you have to know? I mean, that's a big deal.
Yeah, it is different for each project, of course. I mean, I think for any of these, it's like, start small and build off, off this, your first small success. do something like, hey, I want to, I mean, for the Variax specifically, like, a lot of it starts off with just kind of, reading and absorbing and thinking about, how things work. And we have, there were a lot of other engineers, really smart people that, we all would talk, to each other too. And in fact, that was actually one of my first, Greg worked at Elise's as well. I knew him from Elise's, but I don't think we had really, probably spent much time. We were in different buildings and stuff. But
Right.
when I was thinking like about the pickup, I was like, well, I need to, I want to model the response, the electrical response of this pickup. And it's like, okay, you get a coil and you get some loss, and you get some capacitance, and the way I was drawing the model in a couple of different ways, but ultimately I went and asked Greg, who's working, it might have been consulting for Line 6 at the time, and we talked about pickups for a while, and
Right.
Greg thought about it. He's like, yeah, well, you should have the coil resistance is, going to be here, and then the series with this, and this parasitic effect's going to be, in parallel over here, and I was like, yeah, that makes a lot of sense. So, when you don't know things, asking for help or having a discussion with other people is always, a good thing. And at the start of a project, for sure, if you're kind of trying to figure out where to get started, it's sometimes those ideas can be sparked from a conversation, even if it's a conversation where the person doesn't think that they've been helpful to you. You realize, no, you've done things that now my mind is on a different track or something. But yeah.
So when you were at Line 6, and you were getting a chance to work on products, very successful products, because Variax did very well. Both the acoustic and the electric versions did really well. Mm-hmm. So you're working on products, and you're getting a chance to truly, use your creative brain and your technical brain to be able to make a product and see it come to life. What was it that made you decide to move on again and do your own thing?
It's just kind of a timing thing, really. And I was working. In fact, this was where at Line 6 I met Dave Freeling, one of the other co-founders, and he was involved in Variax much in the same way that we started, had our working relationship here. Dave was like the firmware engineer, and he was kind of setting up the code base and the interaction with the peripheral controls, and he set me up with like, okay, here's where you do your code.
Do code here.
Do code here, and so it was it became we had a very kind of successful collaboration. We kind of had our own language, and understood how to work with each other really effortlessly. So we had finished Variax Acoustic had just shipped, and Dave had given his notice, and Dave and Greg were going to start this new venture, Damage Control, along with Lucian too, who was had also worked at Line 6, but was not working there at the time. So Dave told me about this venture. He's like, hey, me and Greg and Lucian are going to start this new company. And, we had just finished Acoustic Variax, and I felt kind of like, okay, that's done. And right. I know some of the next things, I know Line 6 was looking at, moving some of that, some of the technology into a software driven, product and things like that, where I felt like, that's not something that I'm going to really be able to, that's kind of not where my brain is at, and they probably weren't looking for me to specifically do that, but it just seemed like a good break at that point. Is like, I'm kind of interested. I kind of want to see what these guys, got cooking, and what's going to happen with them. And it just seemed like the time is right, because I'm not in the middle of a project. I'm not
Right.
like gonna like leave them high and dry. And so it really just was a matter of timing. And I thought, um, you know, give it a shot. Why not? I was probably, un, you know, I didn't have any actual realistic views of what might happen. I had some unrealistic views, but that's what allowed me to take the plunge, because
Sure.
you don't know what you're jumping into. So I just decided to, see what would be up with this new venture.
Well, it's interesting because the sort of the stuff you're talking about all the way back from analog devices about not wanting to wear a white lab coat and not wanting to have a Monday morning meeting at 9 a.m. and not wanting to have TPS reports and red
Right.
staplers.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm going to need that tomorrow by 2:30. Yeah, not wanting that kind of culture. The culture that you guys set up in the company is very much not that. It is very much a, for those of you guys that are listening or watching. I mean, I can tell you right now that the three founders have seen more movies between the three of them than most humans have imbibed, and can basically quote on an hourly basis, basically the entire film at all times. So it's always like trying to wade through movie quotes. Like, oh, okay, where was that? Is it Brewster's Millions? Gee, maybe.
I didn't see that.
No, like sometimes they're really obvious, and sometimes they're so wonderfully obtuse. It's like Dennis Miller before he decided to start trying to kill caribou or something. But you just mentioned the idea of having a bunch of collaborative conversations that help spark new directions in your research, and those things must be really fantastic to have in a product development environment. I mean, it's the fact that you've got a heavy DSP guy, a heavy analog guy, a heavy firmware guy. You guys can basically make everything, just the three of you, and then all the rest of us just sweep the floors and try to make some podcasts and crap.
Lucky for us, we've also we've brought in some fresh young minds who are propelling the company forward as we speak, which is important. So it is fun to be able to kind of have ideas and just kind of act on them and implement them. And like I said, we've got some new sources of ideas that are doing some exciting things that are going to make my job easier and more fun still, by presenting me with more tools and sounds and technology and techniques to kind of go further than we currently are even.
We can talk about your brain and your technical acumen all we want, but a lot of the sort of the Strymon thing comes back to your ears. And we were talking about Starlab, and you were telling me about the genesis of what happened between Starlab being a reverb and then all of a sudden having Carplus strong synthesis in it. And basically you were saying that you were listening to some reverb tales while you were in development and heard the beginnings of something sounding synthetic in the reverb tail and thought, oh, wow, maybe we should try to actually do some synth stuff in there.
Yeah, I think probably specifically it was when it wasn't actually the reverb tail, but I'm nitpicking, not that it matters, but it was in the delay at high feedback, because the first idea was, hey, let's have Starlab, let's turn its pre-delay into actually more of a full feature delay, and you can, it's just going to be a real big value added to what this module can do, and it'll add like a ton of really cool sounds. So then, as I was just turning up the feedback range, and because it's a pre-delay, it essentially gets down to close to pretty much zero delay. So of course, when you've got high feedback and once you get the short enough delay. Now you're getting, just a sustaining oscillation in a sense. But
Right.
so just by itself, it was like, oh, this it might need work, but you can hear how, okay, this is basically the start of a Karplus strong algorithm, and that in particular is an algorithm that's been around for a bit, but there are kind of some things you can do within it that we did that kind of help, I think, enhance its tonality and things like that. But yeah, I guess I listen for opportunities to try to see if there's things that we can do that are going to be musical and useful. And the trick is always to try to you don't want to come up with some kind of crazy sound just for the sake of
For
it
preset
being crazy.
37, you want to
Yeah,
have a crazy sound for preset 37 so that
Well,
you can see
no,
exactly what it can do at once.
well, in the context of a multi effect or something, it's okay, for wacky stuff, but like, you don't want to kind of try to base a product around something that's going to be a bit of a novelty. So,
Well, the Miku pedal, probably has not
oh
sold,
yeah,
probably not sold enough units to really, yeah. But it's amazing.
that is pretty funny. Yeah.
It's funny. There's something about stuff like that. It's good that some people are still crazy enough to put out
Yeah.
stuff like that.
I mean,
You would.
I enjoyed watching the video on it. I was like,
We're talking about for those of you at home, we're talking about the Mrs. Smith. She did a shred guitar thing only with the Miku pedal. It's just the video is just ridiculous. It's hilarious. But speaking about ears, so you're basically the mix engineer, mastering engineer for the company. I think about my life. Long before any of this marketing stuff was all studio work and mixing and records and stuff. And everybody has rooms they feel comfortable in, speakers they prefer to get the right thing. Like how anal about that kind of stuff are you, or do you find that you're able to hear what you need to hear in a vast array of listening environments and rooms and speakers and things?
I have a setup that usually doesn't vary too much, and the monitors I really like to listen are actually the Alesis M1 actives.
Okay.
And
I'm showing a picture of your desk at the moment. I'm trying to see if there's actually a picture of those speakers. I don't know if there is, but here's you with the Benson. But got it. So the M1's got it.
Yeah, M1 actives, and I know that they're probably not what most commonly think of for a studio monitor, but they I have a long relationship with them, and I'm comfortable with them.
Right.
And a lot of times, don't always, but I have this Agile AL 3000 guitar that's got a Seymour Duncan 59 in the neck and a GFS, like really cheap but good GFS.
I have a GFS. I have one of those GFS, the Gretsch pickup kind of things.
Oh, okay, yeah.
It's fine. It works great. I've got it in Sir. It's fine.
Yeah. I've got this. It's a PAF style in the bridge, and that guitar, it's got an ebony fingerboard, and the 59 is a little bit bright. So it's interesting because it's a humbucker guitar, but it's really got kind of a pretty good snap to it. So I find that I use that guitar a lot when I'm developing sound, just because it's that combination with the speakers. It's just something that I'm used to. So it's not always about like, to a certain extent, if you've established the sounds, you want to hear other sounds in relationship to the sound you've established. So like
sure.
the goldenness of the particular sound you started with isn't really that critical in a sense. You if you kind of know where you're coming from, and then where you are relative to where you've come from.
Sure.
So so that's a setup I feel familiar with. When we first moved to our offices here, think it was before we had the carpet in. Well, we put up a lot of sound treatment on the walls.
Right.
I don't know if you remember, we had like the 20-foot ladder.
Yeah.
Drilling into concrete, and OSHA approved, I'm sure, but
probably not.
Before we did that, I forget what I was working on at the time. I moved in here. It might have been the start of, I don't know if it was Big Sky, maybe, but I had started. It was just in the early stages of it, and I was fighting with the actual reverb of our building, and it's just like, I was like, yeah. So we got the sound, and that kind of knocked it all down. So I can, as long as the acoustic environment is doesn't have some sort of real terrible flaw, I'm pretty good at just going with it. But when I'm coding, writing equations, or thinking about things, like there could be a train going by, or a baseball game 3 feet away. Like I don't hear it. Like I'm just zoned in.
That's amazing.
You can talk to me and I won't hear you because I'm thinking. But if I'm listening to something and somebody snapped their fingers, I'd be like, wait a second, shut up. I can't. I have zero tolerance for outside noise when I'm trying to listen. Like when I'm making a critical assessment, like I can't shut anything out. So it's funny. But if I'm not listening, if I'm doing the other part of it, then I don't hear anything.
I bought when I bought my house in LA in 03 or whatever, 04. I was standing out front, and it was in Eagle Rock, Pasadena area, and I'm standing out front of the house, and I heard this just unbelievably low rumble, and I thought it was JPL because the Jet Propulsion Laboratory is just over the hill, and I thought, when I was in college in Utah, I was, you could hear them testing the space shuttle engines at Thiokol 50 miles away because it was in a bunker, and it would shake the ground like in another town. And I thought, it's got to be JPL. So when I was building the studio, I went hardcore. Like I took the garage and I built 2 walls that each wall had an STC of like 60, basically. So they were like Maslowed vinyl, hat channel, Isomax clips, 6 inches of air, and then another one of those is awful. And one night I was mixing, and I heard, it was the middle of August, and I heard this like tink tink sound. I couldn't figure out what it was, and I thought, what the hell is that? It's August, it's not raining, but it sounded like rain on a gutter. And then I realized it was the bubbles in my Diet Coke can. And I realized then, you've screwed up. You're never going to make a nice sounding track in the studio ever, and you've just wasted all of this money and time. Yeah, and it was true. It was true because it was so dead that you had no perspective of the outside world at all. It's awful. Oh, and that noise was not JPL. It was my neighbor playing Myst in his home theater. He had like 2,000 watt subs, and he was playing like first person shooter games with his subwoofers on. And I was like, "What is that?" God. It's going to get into an acoustic guitar track. I don't know. Before we go, you can't see this, but I'm going to show them the picture of you in 1989 in the forest. With your guitar. This picture is so fantastic. There's something about it that I absolutely love. It's just, you built this guitar, right? This is one you actually built?
The sad part is it was actually a 1969 Telecaster that I bought in 1978. It was post CBS. No one, it was like the dregs of post CBS, you loser. It was like
it was a 3-bolt. It was 3-bolt, man, loser.
But I kind of Steve Morsed it. So I think in that picture it has 4 pickups and 3 toggle switches, and I took a belt sander to it and put a mahogany stain on it, and this was long before I realized that I had something that I would later on in life wish I'd never done any of this stuff to. But
it's got a Strat neck as well on it. Yeah.
Yes. I think that was actually a Kubicki Strat. Remember, Phil?
Oh, Philip. Yeah, got it. Now wait. So you can't see this, but I was determined that I didn't want you to feel called out that I showed an old picture of you. So I have a picture of mine from almost the same era that unfortunately shows me in what looks like dreads, playing a jazz gig in shorts in college. But unfortunately, It was a perm. Anyway, if you don't comb or brush a perm for very long, it just turns into dreads, and then anyway. But thank you very much for taking the time, and we'll absolutely have you again. And thank all of you guys. Remember, I'm going to put the contact back up here at the top. So remember, the email, if you want to ask questions or leave comments, is stricast@strymon.net. And the phone number, if you want to leave questions or comments, is 310-817-0404. And if you are international, remember to put the old +1 in front. And ladies and gentlemen, that shall do it for the first inaugural Strymon episode of StryCast. So thank you guys very much. Pete, thank you very much. And we will see you again. Cheers.
Bye.